And now, a passage from Thomas Jefferson by James Schouler from Chapter 13, Founder of a University, 1809 to 1826. During the last years of his prolonged life, however, Jefferson devoted himself most strenuously to the work of higher education in his state and neighborhood, renewing the fond affection of his youth. The University of Virginia, this darling child of his old age, as Mr. Randall so happily terms it, was the fruition of schemes cherished long before by Jefferson while he was governor of his state, and developed during his later diplomatic sojourn abroad. He had postponed the subject necessarily while engrossed in the cares of state, but he had never forgotten it. With the innate pride of a Virginian, Jefferson had long aimed to place the Old Dominion foremost among the whole sisterhood of states in elevating the standards of education, as she already was foremost in years and political influence. As early as 1779, he had introduced into the General Assembly a bill for the wider diffusion of knowledge in the state. Its unit was to be the district school, which had proved so valuable an institution in New England. Next in grade were proposed grammar and classical schools still open to all youth, and crowning the whole, a state university to which, by a system of public selection, the choicest youth of the lower grades, however poor or humble, might be promoted. That scheme was laid aside, for few Virginians of influence cared for the education of the poorer trash about them. But the connection of popular and higher education in a state as a comprehensive whole always remained in Jefferson's mind, and to the end of his life he cherished the wish of bringing to light by such processes that genius which lies latent in the common people, and developing it with the full assistance of a liberal education generously supplied from the public treasury. Little as New England orthodoxy had sympathized with him personally, Jefferson greatly admired the common school system of that section of the Union, but he could not persuade his own state to adopt it. With corresponding ill success, too, did he strive to impress upon Virginia the compact New England establishment of township governments, those primaries of rugged independence and patriotic self-respect, whose energetic concentration, unlike the diffuse efforts of his own rural neighbors in county meetings, he had experienced not with unmixed displeasure at the time of the embargo. I felt, he said, the foundations of the government shaken under my feet by the New England townships. There was not an individual in these states whose body was not thrown with all its momentum into action. This later age of progressive homogeneousness has seen Virginia launched at length into the gratifying experiment of a comprehensive common school instruction, while Jefferson's own practical accomplishments were necessarily confined to the more exclusive scope of university education. While governor of Virginia, he had contemplated his own alma mater, William and Mary College, as the appropriate seat of supreme learning, and had somewhat earlier tried his hand at broadening its obviously cramped foundations. But while abroad, his mind became familiarized with European university methods, from whose comparative study he returned home with ideas which not even Harvard, Yale, or Princeton had yet imported. Hitherto, our best type of higher education was British colonial. We emulated Oxford and Cambridge, but resembled rather Eton, Harrow, Rugby, and the other higher English schools in standard. Jefferson's educational ideas were eclectic and embraced whatever was admirable in the continental establishments of learning. Edinburgh and Geneva he praised as the two eyes of Europe. No longer satisfied with the usual curriculum, whose stereotyped course of instruction was confined to Greek and Latin, with a smattering of other liberal studies, his plans embraced a broad classification of useful sciences, adding as university features military education, technology, agriculture, and the liberal arts. From the college he expanded into the true university idea of maintaining distinct professional schools where not only law, theology, and medicine might be taught, but other branches of generous training. So expansive a scheme of higher education he did not expect to realize at once upon the bounty of Virginia. But the bold outlines of such a plan may be seen projected in his correspondence about the close of the war with Great Britain. Jefferson's more immediate schemes developed from a languishing local seminary at Charlottesville, known as the Albemarle Academy. With the aid of other private subscriptions besides his own, he procured an enlargement of its operations into an institution which was incorporated in 1816 by the name of the Central College. The presidential trio of Virginians, Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe, led at once the illustrious list of its Board of Visitors, and under such powerful auspices, an act from the Virginia legislature was procured 2 years later which appropriated $15,000 a year for the support of a state university where all the branches of useful science should be taught. Jefferson's advice swayed the opinions of colleagues only less distinguished than himself, appointed on a commission by the governor of the state to report a site, a plan of building, and a scheme of instruction to the next legislature. The report which Jefferson prepared was a remarkable one, and acting upon its suggestions, the legislature passed in 1819 the act which founded the University of Virginia for the first time as a definite institution, with Central College at Charlottesville for its basis. Of a board of 7 visitors appointed by the executive of the state under this statute to supervise and control the affairs of the university, Jefferson was chosen rector, and henceforth, during the last 7 years of his life, the venerable statesman, soon to enter the rare cycle of 80, became the directing and shaping power of the whole enterprise. His immediate proximity to the site selected, his transcendent fame, and the supreme interest he had manifested in the cause induced the other visitors to leave in his hands almost the entire practical development of this new enterprise, not only in devising the entire system of instruction to be pursued, but in planning and erecting the buildings and providing for material comfort and accommodation of future students and instructors. Did Jefferson's creative skill dominate? It was his policy from the outset to push forward a work of magnificent construction, and rear in his little market town, hitherto attractive only from its salubrious mountain surroundings, an architectural pile which should instantly appeal to the imagination and attract from abroad such distinguished savants as he proposed inviting presently to fill the chief professorships. The general arrangement of the university buildings was accordingly unique. They occupied 3 sides of a vast quadrangular lawn, fronting inward, the 2 longest of them being devoted to pavilions, or professors' houses, with intervening rows of students' apartments more modest in height, and consisting of a single story faced with colonnades which opened, like all other main aspects of this academic village, upon the grassy enclosure of the great campus. A large rotunda for library and lecture halls rose superbly from the 3rd and intermediate side, approached by long steps and lofty columns, and surmounted by a spacious dome. Columns and capitals were chiseled in Italy, fragments of the celebrated Roman ruins seemed visible from various points of view, and the whole structure and arrangement of the vast collegiate quadrangle, open at the lower end, might suggest in somber red brick St. Peter's with its cloistered approach on either side, except that here, in place of the great Christian edifice itself for a central glory, rose a model of the Roman Pantheon reduced to 1/3 of its original size, and here adapted to the temple, not of all the gods, nor of the one living God, but of all sciences. Something of Monticello, too, was in the atmosphere of this unique creation. These university buildings, still preserved as Jefferson planned and built them, exhibit, like his famed dwelling house, the combined effects of study and foreign observation, not always harmonious, to be sure, but with picturesque and delicate effect, in bringing the best influences of the old world to grace the growth of the new. Roman, Tuscan, and medieval architecture are here cunningly arranged to make their silent impression upon the American youth. And in marble capitals and classic columns, as one saunters to and from his daily recitations, the fragmentary remnants of world-renowned edifices haunt insensibly his imagination. The very ground plans of the buildings, and every material estimate and architectural detail down to the mortar and foundation stones, were the historic product of one constructive mind. Jefferson gave freely and unstintingly of his time and energy to the cause of the university, which alone from posterity's standpoint must prove of incalculable worth. In his correspondence with the great and learned of both hemispheres, he advertised the institution far and wide. It was the last fond darling of his enthusiasm, but the immediate cost of the buildings, about $300,000, so far exceeded the general expectation as to produce great discontent in the state, and threatened the enterprise with failure, and some Virginians went so far as to charge Jefferson and his able coadjutor and confidant Joseph Carrington Cabell, who served in the legislature, with drawing the state unartfully from one appropriation to another until it foundered in the mire of palpable indebtedness. Indeed, these earnest patrons had constant need of their most ingenious skill and resources to establish this new university securely, for against them were arrayed the public sloth and parsimony which counted for cardinal virtues in Southern state administration at that epoch. The powerful opposition of Old William and Mary College and its conservative friends, rival constituencies, jealous of the favor which had exalted Albemarle County to such preference, and not least of all, that favorite policy which disperses all bounties of a commonwealth for local benefit rather than combine them for one great result. The worst of all enemies, as a recent writer has remarked, to the idea of state universities. By selecting Dr. Cooper, the Unitarian Priestley's friend, for a professional chair, Jefferson so offended the prepossessions of many, whose good will was essential, that the obnoxious arrangement had to be cancelled. And even then, his adversaries claimed strenuously that the intention was to make this new institution a bulwark of infidelity. The triumph over formidable opposition here upon the soil of the Old Dominion, in what Cabell once called the holy cause of the university, and the first triumph of the kind, makes university training the desirable capstone of popular education for every state. Those prosperous commonwealths of the Mississippi Valley, reared upon Virginia's northwestern territorial cession, and endowed severally upon their admission to the Union from the public lands, owe other debts of their own to Jefferson's foresight and philanthropy. And in his own reluctant state, with plans for rearing the youth too comprehensive to be realized in his own generation, Jefferson gave what few have ever afforded, the fervor and energy of old age. A system of general instruction, he wrote in 1818, which shall reach every description of our citizens, from the richest to the poorest, as it was the earliest, so will it be the latest of all the public concerns in which I shall permit myself to take an interest. The first rector of the University of Virginia lived long enough to see the institution opened in the spring of 1825, with a fair roll of students for matriculation, and a corps of able professors, most of whom he imported from Europe, recognizing that in the world of letters a young republic must not be self-sufficient. Vicissitudes shared by Virginia herself have kept this institution perhaps from making its impression felt throughout the Union. But the oldest and richest of America's institutions have in later times enlarged, one after another, their sphere of activities upon a similar model. All the strong ideas which Jefferson's University put in force for the first time upon American soil remain to this day as the founder fixed them. The distinct schools in which one may specialize his knowledge, the substitution of electives for the routine of a curriculum, the honor system of discipline among students which sets them to influencing one another and makes a law of liberty, and finally, an even balance between all religious and political sects and parties. In matters of the higher education, Jefferson, as a close student of comparative systems and an adapter to the American age, was much farther in advance of his times than in politics, and hence his fame in that respect has come less rapidly, but it will come at last. If you enjoy High Americana, please head on over to Patreon, where you can support the channel and audio requests can be made. Thank you.